stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the dusty town of Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, in the scorching summer of 1878, and Clara Whitmore knew her carefully constructed lies were about to unravel like cheap thread. She pressed her gloved hand against the worn leather seat, steadying herself as the driver's gruff voice announced their arrival. Through the small window she could see the main street stretching before her, lined with weathered wooden buildings that seemed to sag under the relentless August sun. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a reminder of the deception she carried like a stone in her chest. The advertisement had been specific. Jacob Thornton, cattle rancher, seeking a wife of good breeding and gentle disposition, must be accomplished in household management, preferably educated, age 20 to 25. Clara had responded with a letter written in her finest hand describing herself as the daughter of a prosperous Boston merchant, versed in literature and music, skilled in all domestic arts. Every word had been true, except for the most important detail. She had not mentioned that her father's prosperity had crumbled 3 years ago, that she had spent the last 18 months working in a textile factory, her hands roughened and calloused from operating the massive looms. She had not mentioned that she was 26, not 23 as she had claimed, and she certainly had not mentioned that her desperation to escape Boston had less to do with seeking adventure and everything to do with fleeing the persistent advances of the factory foreman who had made her life unbearable. The driver opened the door, and Clara stepped down into the thick dust of the street. The heat struck her immediately, so different from the humid summers of Massachusetts. It was dry and fierce, stealing the moisture from her lips within moments. She carried only one small trunk and a carpet bag, all that remained of her former life. Around her, Silver Creek bustled with afternoon activity. Cowboys rode past, their spurs jingling. A freight wagon creaked down the street, loaded with supplies. From somewhere nearby came the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. "Miss Whitmore?" The voice was deep, hesitant, and Clara turned to find herself looking up at a man who could only be Jacob Thornton. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his clean shirt. His face was tanned and weathered from years under the Wyoming sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent a lot of time squinting into the distance. Those eyes were a striking blue, clear and direct, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. He held his hat in his hands, revealing dark hair touched with just a hint of gray at the temples. Clara guessed he was in his early 30s, though the hard life of ranching might have aged him beyond his years. "Mr. Thornton," she managed, extending her hand. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was a small mercy. He took her hand carefully, as if she were made of porcelain, and she felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. "Welcome to Silver Creek," he said. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." It was long, Clara admitted, but not unbearable. Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite read, and he released her hand. "Let me get your trunk," he said, moving toward where the driver had placed her meager luggage. Clara watched as he hefted the trunk easily, carrying it toward a wagon hitched nearby. The horse, a patient-looking bay gelding, flicked its ears as Jacob loaded the trunk into the back. Clara followed, clutching her carpet bag, very aware of the curious glances from passers-by. A mail-order bride was always a subject of interest in a frontier town. She had heard the stories, knew that some women arrived to find their prospective husbands nothing like their letters had promised. Some found love anyway. Some found only hardship. She did not yet know which category she would fall into. Jacob helped her onto the wagon seat with the same careful courtesy, then climbed up beside her. The leather creaked under his weight. He gathered the reins and clicked his tongue, and the bay horse began to pull them down the main street. "The ranch is about 5 miles out," Jacob said, his eyes on the road ahead. "Good land near the creek. I have about 200 head of cattle right now, hoping to expand next year." Clara nodded, trying to appear interested and knowledgeable, though she knew almost nothing about cattle ranching. In her letters, she had been vague about such matters, focusing instead on her domestic skills and her willingness to embrace frontier life. "The house is not fancy," Jacob continued, and she detected a note of apology in his voice. "Just 4 rooms. But it is solid, keeps out the weather. I built most of it myself." "I am sure it will be lovely," Clara said, and she meant it. After sharing a cramped boarding house room with 3 other factory girls, 4 rooms sounded like a palace. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the steady clip of the horse's hooves, and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, rolling grassland dotted with sagebrush, mountains rising in the purple distance. It was beautiful in a stark, overwhelming way that made Clara feel very small and very far from everything she had ever known. "Can I ask you something?" Jacob said suddenly. Clara's stomach clenched. "Of course." "Why did you really come here?" His voice was gentle, not accusatory, but the question hung between them like a challenge. "I mean, a woman like you from Boston, educated and refined, you could have had your pick of suitors back east." Clara's first instinct was to deflect, to offer some romantic notion about seeking adventure or appreciating the beauty of the West. But something in his eyes, that direct, honest gaze, made her want to tell the truth, or at least part of it. "Boston was not what you might imagine," she said carefully. "After my father died, things became difficult. I worked in a factory. The work was hard, the conditions poor, and there were men who thought a woman alone was fair game for their attentions." Jacob's jaw tightened. "I am sorry to hear that." "I do not want pity," Clara said quickly. "I want a fresh start. I want a life where I can be useful and valued. Your letters suggested you were offering that." "I meant every word I wrote," Jacob said. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I should be honest with you too. I have been alone a long time. My parents died of fever when I was 20. I have been building the ranch ever since, and there has not been much time for courting. Most of the women in Silver Creek are already spoken for, and the ones who are not are looking for men with more established prospects. I figured a mail order arrangement was my best chance." There was no self-pity in his words, just a straightforward assessment of his situation. Clara found herself appreciating his directness. "So we are both taking a chance," she said. "Seems like it," Jacob agreed, and for the first time she saw him smile. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "Guess we'll have to figure it out as we go." The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise. It was exactly as Jacob had described, a simple structure of logs and timber, weathered gray by sun and wind. But it sat in a pretty spot near a line of cottonwood trees that marked the course of the creek. A small barn stood nearby, along with a corral where several horses grazed. Chickens scratched in the yard. It looked like a home, or at least like it could become one. Jacob pulled the wagon up to the front door and helped Clara down. She stood for a moment, taking it all in, trying to imagine herself belonging here. It was so different from everything she had known, and yet there was something appealing about its simplicity, its solidity. "Let me show you inside," Jacob said, carrying her trunk. The front door was not locked. He pushed it open and stood aside to let her enter first. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and Clara blinked as her eyes adjusted. The main room was larger than she had expected, with a stone fireplace at one end and a sturdy table with 4 chairs near the center. A rocking chair sat by the hearth. The kitchen area occupied one corner with a cast iron stove and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. Everything was neat and clean, surprisingly so for a bachelor household. "My room is through there," Jacob said, pointing to a door on the left. "I figured you would want the room on the right, at least until we decide how things will be. There is a small room in back for storage, and an outhouse about 20 yards from the back door." Clara turned to him, surprised by his consideration. She had assumed, given that they were to be married, that she would be expected to share his bed immediately. The fact that he was giving her space, time to adjust, made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. "That's very kind." Jacob shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Seemed like the right thing to do. You have come a long way." You should get settled before we make any big decisions." He carried her trunk into the small bedroom, and Clara followed. The room contained a narrow bed with a simple quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a chest of drawers. A single window looked out toward the creek. It was sparse but clean, and the afternoon light streaming through the window gave it a warm glow. "I will let you rest," Jacob said. "There is water in the pitcher. When you're ready, come out, and I will make us some supper." After he left, Clara sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. She had done it. She had traveled over 1,000 miles, left everything familiar behind, and arrived at this strange new place. Jacob seemed like a decent man, better than she had dared to hope. But the weight of her deception still pressed on her. How long could she maintain the fiction of being the refined, accomplished woman he expected? How long before he saw her rough hands, noticed the gaps in her knowledge of household management, realized she was not who she had claimed to be? She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the small closet, arranging her toiletries on the washstand. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped carefully in cloth, was the one treasure she had brought from Boston, a small leather-bound volume of poetry that had belonged to her mother. She placed it on the chest of drawers, a reminder of who she had been and who she hoped to become again. After washing her face and hands and attempting to make herself presentable after the long journey, Clara emerged from the bedroom. The smell of cooking meat greeted her, and she found Jacob at the stove, frying steaks in a large iron skillet. A pot of beans simmered beside it, and he had set out bread and butter on the table. "Can I help?" Clara asked, feeling useless standing in the doorway. "You could slice some of that bread if you like," Jacob said. "Knife is on the table." Clara moved to help, grateful for something to do with her hands. As she sliced the bread, she watched Jacob from the corner of her eye. He moved around the kitchen with easy competence, checking the meat, stirring the beans. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing tanned forearms corded with muscle. Everything about him spoke of strength and capability, a man who had learned to take care of himself. They ate at the table, the meal simple but satisfying. Clara had not realized how hungry she was until she took the first bite. The steak was cooked perfectly, tender and flavorful, the beans seasoned with bacon and molasses. "This is delicious," she said, and meant it. Jacob looked pleased. "A man learns to cook when he lives alone, or he starves, though I will admit my repertoire is limited. Mostly beef and beans, bread when I can manage it." "I can help with that," Clara said. Then before she could stop herself, she added, "Though I should confess I am not as accomplished a cook as my letters might have suggested." Jacob paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "No?" Clara felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I mean, I can cook basic things. But working in the factory, I ate mostly in boarding houses. I have not had much opportunity to practice fancier dishes." She waited for disappointment, even anger. But Jacob just nodded thoughtfully. "Well, basic is what we need out here. Nobody's expecting French cuisine in Wyoming Territory." His easy acceptance loosened something in Clara's chest. She took a breath and decided to risk more honesty. "There are other things I was not entirely truthful about in my letters." Jacob set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Like what?" "I am 26, not 23. My hands are not soft because I have spent the last year and a half working a loom. And while I can read and write well enough, I am not as widely educated as I implied. I went to school until I was 14, then had to help my family." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Clara forced herself to meet Jacob's eyes, to face whatever judgment or rejection she found there. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like relief. "Can I tell you something?" Jacob said. "I have been dreading your arrival." Clara blinked, surprised. "What?" "Not because I did not want a wife," he hastened to add, but because I was terrified you would be disappointed, that I would not live up to the man I presented in my letters. I tried to make the ranch sound more prosperous than it is, the house nicer, my prospects better. The truth is I am barely scraping by most months. One bad winter or a disease outbreak in the herd could ruin me. I am not the secure, established rancher I implied. They stared at each other across the table, and then to Clara's surprise, she began to laugh. It started as a small chuckle, but grew until she was laughing so hard tears pricked her eyes. After a moment, Jacob joined in, his deep laugh filling the small house. "We are both liars," Clara gasped out between laughs. "Looks like it," Jacob agreed, wiping his eyes, "though I prefer to think of it as optimistic interpretation." When the laughter faded, they sat in a more comfortable silence than before. Clara felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The truth, or at least part of it, was out in the open. "So where does that leave us?" Clara asked. Jacob considered the question. "Well, you are here, I am here. We are both looking for a fresh start. Maybe we can be honest with each other from now on and see what happens." "No more pretending to be people we are not?" "No more pretending," Jacob agreed. He extended his hand across the table. "Deal?" Clara shook his hand, feeling the now familiar warmth of his calloused palm against hers. Deal. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier. The creek bubbled in the distance. An owl hooted from the cottonwoods. The wind whispered through the grass. And from the next room, she could hear the faint sounds of Jacob settling in for the night. She thought about the day, about the man who was supposed to become her husband, about the strange turn her life had taken. Despite everything, despite the uncertainty and the fear, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of a rooster crowing. Sunlight streamed through her window, bright and insistent. She rose and dressed quickly, then ventured out to find the house empty. Through the window, she could see Jacob in the corral, working with one of the horses. She watched for a moment, fascinated by the way he moved, patient and confident, as the young horse circled on a long line. Clara used the outhouse, then returned to the kitchen and surveyed the supplies. She might not be an expert cook, but she could manage breakfast. She stoked the fire in the stove, set coffee to brew, and began frying eggs and thick slices of bacon. By the time Jacob came in, stamping dust from his boots, the meal was ready. "Smells good," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "You did not have to do that." "I wanted to earn my keep," Clara said, bringing plates to the table. "Besides, you cooked last night. It is only fair." They ate together, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised Clara with its naturalness. Jacob told her about the ranch, about the work that needed doing, about his plans for the future, if he could make them work. Clara listened, asking questions, genuinely interested despite her lack of knowledge about cattle and land management. "I could use help with some things, Trainer," Jacob said as they finished eating. "The chickens need tending, and the garden has gotten away from me. If you're willing, that is. I do not expect you to work yourself to death." "I am willing," Clara assured him. "I would rather be useful than sit idle." So began a pattern that carried them through the following weeks. Clara took over the chicken coop, collecting eggs and ensuring the birds were fed and protected. She tackled the neglected garden, weeding and watering, coaxing the vegetables back to health. She cooked meals, cleaned the house, mended Jacob's worn shirts. Jacob worked the ranch, tending the cattle, mending fences, breaking horses. In the evenings, they ate together and talked, learning about each other in slow, careful increments. Clara discovered that Jacob had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He was well-read despite his limited formal education, having taught himself from books ordered from back east. He loved this land with a fierce passion, spoke about the mountains and the sky with a poetry that surprised her. He was patient and thoughtful, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. Jacob learned that Clara was stronger than she looked, that her hands might be work-roughened, but she did not shy away from difficult tasks. She had a quick mind and a sharp wit. She sang while she worked, old songs from her childhood that drifted through the open windows. She was not the delicate lady he had imagined, but she was something better. She was real. One evening, about 3 weeks after Clara's arrival, they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and the air had finally cooled after another hot day. Clara had made a pie from the wild berries she had found near the creek, and they had eaten it warm with rich cream from the cow Jacob kept in the barn. "I have been thinking," Jacob said, his voice careful. "We have been living here together for a few weeks now, but we have not talked about getting married. I mean, officially, with a preacher." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "No, we have not." "I do not want to rush you," Jacob continued, "but people in town are starting to talk. I do not care much what they think, but I do not want your reputation damaged." "I appreciate that," Clara said. She had been thinking about the same thing, wondering when Jacob would raise the subject. "But there is still so much we do not know about each other." "True enough," Jacob agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I ask what you are worried about?" Clara considered the question. What was she worried about? That he would regret marrying her? That she would fail to be the wife he needed? That the fragile connection they had built would shatter under the weight of legal commitment? "I suppose I am worried that I am not what you need," she admitted. "That you will wake up one day and realize you made a mistake." Jacob turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "Clara, I have been alone for a long time. I got used to it, figured it was just the way my life would be. Then you came, and suddenly the house feels like a home. I hear you singing and I smile. I eat meals you cooked and I am grateful. You work hard and you do not complain. You talk to me like I am worth talking to. If that is not what I need, I do not know what is." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You are not what I expected either," she said softly, echoing the words she had thought so many times over the past weeks. "No?" Jacob raised an eyebrow. "No, I expected someone gruff and distant, someone who wanted a housekeeper, not a partner. You are kinder than I imagined. More patient, more real." She paused, then added, "You are better than I imagined." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Jacob reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His hand was warm and solid, and Clara felt something inside her settle into place. "So what do you say?" Jacob asked. Should we make this official?" Clara squeezed his hand. "Yes, I think we should." "There is a circuit preacher who comes through Silver Creek once a month. He is due next week. We could do it then, if that is all right with you." "Next week is fine," Clara agreed, and felt a flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach. They sat together as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, countless and brilliant in the vast darkness. Clara leaned her head against Jacob's shoulder, and he put his arm around her, pulling her close. It felt right, this simple intimacy, and Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found where she belonged. The following week, they rode into Silver Creek together. Clara wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that she had carefully pressed. Jacob had cleaned up as well, wearing his good shirt and a string tie, his hair neatly combed. They found the preacher, a weathered man named Reverend Mills, at the small church on the edge of town. The ceremony was brief and simple, with the preacher's wife and the general store owner serving as witnesses. Reverend Mills read from his worn Bible, asking the traditional questions. Jacob answered in his steady voice, and Clara found her own voice was strong and clear as she made her vows. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Jacob kissed her, a gentle brush of his lips against hers that promised more but demanded nothing. Afterward, they had lunch at the town's only restaurant, a splurge Jacob insisted on. Other townspeople came by to offer congratulations, curious about the new Mrs. Thornton. Clara shook hands and smiled, feeling strange and wonderful to be introduced as Jacob's wife. On the ride back to the ranch, the reality of what they had done settled over Clara. She was married now, truly and legally bound to this man she had known for only a month. It should have been terrifying, but instead she felt a calm certainty. That night, as they stood awkwardly in the main room of the house, the weight of expectation hanging between them, Jacob spoke first. "Nothing has to change tonight," he said. I mean, unless you want it to. We can take our time." Clara looked at this man who had been so patient with her, so kind, and made a decision. She crossed the room and took his hands in hers. "I do not want to wait," she said. "We are married now. I want to be your wife in every way." Jacob's eyes darkened, and he cupped her face gently with his rough hands. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Clara whispered, and then his lips were on hers again, no longer gentle but hungry, full of weeks of restrained wanting. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands sliding up his chest to circle his neck. He lifted her easily, carrying her to his room, to the large bed she had never entered, and laid her down with a tenderness that made her ache. What followed was awkward and sweet and passionate, a fumbling discovery that left them both breathless and laughing and tangled together in the sheets. Jacob was careful with her, mindful of her comfort, and Clara found herself responding to his touch in ways that surprised her. When it was over, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You all right?" Jacob murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Better than all right," Clara said, and meant it. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Clara moved into Jacob's room, into the large bed that now felt like theirs. She woke each morning to his warmth beside her, fell asleep each night in his arms. The physical intimacy grew easier and more natural, but it was the emotional intimacy that surprised her most. The way they could talk about anything and nothing. The way he asked for her opinion on ranch matters and actually listened. The way he held her when she had bad dreams about the factory, about the foreman who had made her life hell. Summer faded into autumn, the grass turning gold, the air gaining a crisp edge. Jacob taught Clara to ride, patient as she learned to control the gentle mare he had chosen for her. Together they rode out to check on the cattle, and Clara learned to see the land through his eyes, to understand why he loved it so fiercely. One October afternoon, as they rode back from checking the herd, they came across a small group of cattle caught in a muddy section near the creek. Jacob immediately swung down from his horse and waded in to help free them, and Clara followed without hesitation. Together they worked to drive the frightened animals back to solid ground, getting thoroughly muddy and wet in the process. When the last cow was safely out, they stood panting and filthy, and Jacob started to laugh. Clara looked down at herself, covered head to toe in mud, and joined in. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, laughing like children, and Clara realized with a jolt that she was happy, truly, deeply happy in a way she had never been before. "What?" Jacob asked, seeing the expression on her face. "Nothing," Clara said. "Just thinking how strange life is. 6 months ago I was working in a factory, miserable and scared. Now I am standing in a creek in Wyoming Territory covered in mud, and I have never been happier." Jacob pulled her close, mud and all, and kissed her soundly. "I am pretty happy too," he admitted, "even covered in mud." As winter approached, they prepared the ranch together. Jacob butchered one of the steers, and Clara learned to preserve the meat. They gathered and stored vegetables from the garden. Jacob cut and stacked wood for the stove and fireplace. They worked from dawn to dusk, racing against the coming cold. The first snow came in late November, transforming the landscape overnight. Clara woke to find everything blanketed in white, pristine and beautiful. Jacob took her outside and showed her how to track animals in the snow, how to tell deer from elk, rabbit from fox. They made love in the afternoon while snow fell softly outside, the house warm and cozy, and Clara thought she had never felt so safe. Christmas came, and Clara made a real feast. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, biscuits, and a cake that turned out surprisingly well. Jacob had ridden into town and come back with a length of fabric for a new dress and a hair comb inlaid with mother of pearl. Clara had knitted him a thick scarf and a pair of warm gloves. They exchanged gifts by the fireplace, and Jacob pulled her into his lap and told her she was the best Christmas present he had ever received. Winter was long and hard, with weeks where they could barely leave the house due to the snow and cold. But Clara did not mind. She was warm and fed and in love, and that was enough. She and Jacob played cards and read aloud to each other from his small collection of books. They talked and made love, and simply existed together, learning each other's rhythms and moods. In February, during a brief thaw, disaster struck. They woke one morning to find that several cattle had broken through thin ice on the creek and drowned. It was a significant loss, one that Jacob could barely afford. Clara watched her husband stare at the dead animals, his face blank with shock and grief, and her heart broke for him. "We will survive this," she said, taking his hand. "We will figure it out." "I do not know how," Jacob said, his voice rough. "That was a quarter of the herd. The money I would have gotten from selling them was supposed to carry us through the year." "Then we will find another way," Clara said firmly. "We will cut back, work harder. Maybe you can hire out to other ranchers. We are not giving up." Jacob looked at her, and she saw the fear in his eyes, but also something else: gratitude. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "You wrote a good advertisement," Clara said, trying to lighten the mood, and was rewarded with a small smile. They tightened their belts and worked even harder. Jacob did hire out to neighboring ranches, breaking horses and helping with spring calving. Clara took in sewing from women in town, her fingers flying through mending and alterations late into the night. It was exhausting, but they were doing it together, and that made all the difference. Spring came, bringing new life and new hope. The surviving cattle had made it through the winter in good condition. Jacob managed to buy 3 more head with the money he had earned working for others. The garden began to grow again, and Clara, standing by the stove one morning in late April, realized with a start that her monthly courses were late. Very late. She said nothing to Jacob at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed. But as days turned to weeks and other signs appeared, the tender breasts and mild nausea in the mornings, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. She chose to tell him on a Sunday evening after they had finished supper and were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. The air was soft and warm, full of the scent of growing things. "Jacob," she said, her heart pounding, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Clara assured him quickly. "It was better than fine, actually. I'm pregnant." Jacob stared at her, his mouth slightly open, as if he could not quite process what she had said. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "Pregnant? You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor," Clara said. "I'm about 2 months along, I think." Jacob let out a whoop of joy and scooped her up, spinning her around before carefully setting her back down. "Sorry, should I not do that? I do not want to hurt you." Clara laughed, tears streaming down her face. "I am pregnant, not made of glass, but maybe save the spinning for later." He kissed her then, deep and tender, his hands cradling her face. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Clara said, and believed it with all her heart. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the warm months of summer. Clara's belly grew round, and Jacob treated her like she was the most precious thing in the world. He insisted she not overwork herself, taking on more of the household chores despite his own heavy workload. He talked to her belly, telling their unborn child about the ranch, about the land, about how loved they already were. In late October, as the leaves turned gold and red, Clara went into labor. It was long and difficult, with only Jacob and a midwife from town to help her. Clara had never known pain like this, had moments where she was sure she could not continue, but Jacob held her hand through all of it, wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, told her she was strong and brave, and that he loved her. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, and when the midwife placed him in Clara's arms, she fell in love all over again. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "What should we name him?" Jacob asked, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at his son. "What about Thomas?" Clara suggested. "It was my father's name." "Thomas Thornton," Jacob said, trying it out. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, son." The baby's eyes opened, unfocused but searching, and Clara felt her heart swell until she thought it might burst. This was her family. This was home. Life with a baby was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Thomas was a good baby overall, but he still needed constant care. Clara spent her days feeding him, changing him, rocking him to sleep. Jacob helped whenever he could, walking the floor with his son when Clara was too tired to stand, making funny faces to elicit that precious baby smile. The ranch slowly began to prosper. Jacob's hard work and careful management paid off. The herd grew. He bought more land. The house, which had once seemed adequate, now felt cramped with a baby, and Jacob began making plans to add on 2 more rooms. 2 years passed, then 3. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious little boy who followed his father everywhere. Clara became pregnant again, and this time the labor was shorter. They welcomed a daughter, whom they named Eleanor after Clara's mother. She had Clara's delicate features and Jacob's striking blue eyes. The house expanded, not just in size, but in life and love. There were hard times still, seasons when money was tight or weather threatened the herd, but they faced everything together, Jacob and Clara, a team in every sense of the word. One evening, about 5 years after Clara had first arrived in Silver Creek, they sat on the porch watching Thomas chase fireflies while Eleanor drowsed in Clara's arms. Jacob reached over and took Clara's free hand, lacing their fingers together in the way that had become second nature. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming here, marrying me, this life?" Clara looked at him surprised. "Never. Not for a single moment, do you?" "Not a chance, Jacob said. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I need to tell you something. That day at the train station when I first saw you, I was terrified." "Why?" Clara asked. "Because you were so beautiful, so clearly more than I deserved. I kept waiting for you to realize you had made a mistake. And then that first night, when you told me you were not the woman I expected, I thought my worst fears were coming true." "But," Clara prompted, hearing the shift in his voice, "but then I realized you were right. You were not the wife I expected. You were better. You were real and strong and honest. You worked hard and did not complain. You stood by me when things got tough. You gave me a family." His voice broke slightly. "You gave me everything I did not even know I was missing." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I am not the wife you expected," she said softly, repeating the words that had haunted her that first day. Jacob smiled, that warm smile that still made her heart skip. "You are better than I imagined." They sat together as the stars emerged, their children playing nearby, their hands clasped tight. Clara thought about the scared woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 5 years ago, running from her past and uncertain of her future. She barely recognized that woman now. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had found her place in the world and the love of her life. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Thomas grew tall and strong, already showing signs of inheriting his father's way with horses. Eleanor was bright and curious, constantly asking questions about everything she saw. When Thomas was 8 and Eleanor was 5, Clara became pregnant again. This time they welcomed twin boys whom they named Samuel and Daniel. The house was chaotic and loud and full of love. Jacob built more additions to the house, expanding it to accommodate their growing family. He hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increasing workload, young men from town who were eager to learn the cattle business. The Thornton Ranch became known throughout the territory for the quality of its beef and the integrity of its owner. Clara took on a role in the community, helping organize church socials and teaching some of the children in town to read. She never forgot where she had come from, the desperation that had driven her west, and she made a point of helping other women who found themselves in difficult circumstances. One autumn evening, when the twins were 2 years old and the older children were helping with harvest, Clara and Jacob stole a rare moment alone. They walked down to the creek, to the spot where they had freed the cattle so many years ago, and sat on the bank watching the water flow past. "Do you remember the first time we came here together?" Clara asked, "when we got covered in mud?" Jacob laughed. "How could I forget? You looked like a drowned rat." "So did you," Clara retorted, elbowing him gently. "But I remember thinking that I was happy, truly happy, maybe for the first time in my life." "Are you still happy?" Jacob asked, and Clara heard the vulnerability beneath the question. She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Jacob Thornton, I wake up every day grateful that I answered your advertisement. Grateful for this life, this land, these children. Grateful for you. So yes, I am still happy, more than I ever imagined possible." Jacob pulled her close, and they sat together by the creek as the sun set and the first stars appeared. 20 years of marriage stretched behind them, filled with hardship and triumph, loss and gain, all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that made a life. And Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The children grew up and had families of their own. Thomas took over the ranch, running it with the same dedication his father had shown. Eleanor married a school teacher and moved to Denver, but visited regularly. The twins went into business together, starting a freight company that became successful. Jacob and Clara grew old together, their hands gnarled and their faces lined, but their love undiminished. They sat on the porch of the now sprawling ranch house, surrounded by grandchildren, and told stories of the old days, of how they had met and built a life from nothing. On a warm summer evening when Jacob was 72 and Clara was 71, they sat together watching the sunset over the mountains they had loved for so long. Jacob's health had been failing, and they both knew their time together was drawing to a close. "I need you to know something," Jacob said, his voice weak but clear. "You made my life worth living. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me purpose and joy and a family. You gave me everything." Clara held his hand, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me the same thing. You saved me, Jacob. You gave me a home and love and a reason to keep going. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Even the mud?" Jacob asked with a faint smile. "Especially the mud," Clara said, and they both laughed softly. Jacob passed peacefully in his sleep that night, Clara beside him as she had been for over 40 years. The loss was devastating, a wound that would never fully heal. But Clara took comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together, in the memories of a love that had transformed both their lives. She lived another 5 years, staying active and involved in the ranch and the community. She taught her grandchildren to read and told them stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive. She tended the garden and walked down to the creek and remembered the man who had taken a chance on a desperate woman from Boston. When Clara finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76, she was laid to rest beside Jacob on a hill overlooking the ranch. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to remember them, to tell stories of the mail-order bride and the lonely cowboy who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations, each one remembering the two people who had started it all. The story of Jacob and Clara became family legend, told and retold, a testament to the power of taking chances, of honesty and hard work, and most of all of love that grew deeper and stronger with each passing year. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the cottonwoods and the creek bubbled softly, those who lived on the ranch swore they could feel the presence of that original couple, still together, still watching over the land, and the family they had built from nothing but courage and hope and a willingness to believe in second chances.